common thing parents say is that they're trying to get their child to do a particular thing, whether that is say a particular sound, build their sentences or vocabulary, or even how to tie their shoes. What parents often say is that the child can handle 1, 2, and many times 3 corrections or reteachings, but then the child gives up, melts down, and the parents wonder, why is it that they do that? Why don't they cooperate? Why can't they just learn it? What is the problem? What is the barrier? Today's episode is about their reaction and what is going on with your kiddo. And along with this deeper understanding, you will also learn how to make some of the changes that you want. Does your child have a speech-language delay and you really want them to talk? Do difficult behaviors derail home life and you know the frustration is a communication struggle? Does your child see a speech therapist and you wonder, what do they do and how can I help? If these or similar questions are in your mind, this podcast is for you. Hello, my name is Dinalynn Rosenbusch. I am a speech-language pathologist that has worked with children from birth to 21 for 3 decades. And in my classrooms, I see you wanting to connect with the heart of your child, but their speech and language skills create a barrier. So if you have a kiddo that has difficult behaviors, needs to expand their language or learn to say speech sounds, and maybe even receives speech therapy, stay tuned, because in this podcast, you will learn how to use your daily life as a tool to communication practice and how to do that practice. You will become confident knowing you are making the difference you want to make. And you will hear success stories of parents who have navigated these struggles already. We'll do this all while focusing on building deep, meaningful connection and confidence in your kiddo. So grab a cup of coffee along with a notebook and pen. It's time to speak in the way your child's brain understands. And that is the language of play. Hello, listeners. I haven't read a review for a while, so today I'm going to start by reading a review. This review is from Erica from Get Comfy with Numbers. Erica leaves 5 stars and titles it Simple and Doable. She wrote, "So many parenting podcasts feel complicated, but this podcast makes everything feel simple and doable. It's helped me shift my mindset to being more curious when different situations happen with my kiddos. Thank you." Well, thank you to you too, Erica, because that warms my heart. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. I want to take these topics that are full of jargon and complex and make them simple and doable. So that feeds me. Thank you for that review. And listeners, if you have not yet left a review for the language of play, I would love it if you would head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave me a written review. I do read every review that comes to me, and it warms my heart, and I'm always so grateful. In addition, your reviews make this podcast become more popular, so the reach of this podcast to other parents that need help in the same simple, doable way. So this spread of information is impacted by your review. So I thank you ahead of time for doing that on behalf of all parents that are wanting this kind of information. In my show notes, I have a free gift for you. It is titled 5 Ways to Get Your Kids to Listen Better. Go to the show notes and you will see the link to sign up for that free gift. You will then receive support in your inbox with tips and strategies and deeper understanding of what is going on. Speaking of what is going on, let's get into today's episode where we talk a lot about what is going on in the brain of your child. When parents come to see me, one of the many common things parents say is, well, I've been trying to get my child to do whatever it is. Maybe that is to say a certain sound. Maybe it is to answer questions on the same topic. Maybe it is to answer questions at all because the child stares at them. Maybe it is something that is outside of the language area, such as tying shoes or taking out the trash. Whatever the thing is that parents are talking to me about, the common thing that I hear that parents struggle the most with is when they've made this correction and they're talking to their child, the meltdown happens with the first, second, or third time that parents are saying to do this thing, whatever the thing is. And parents wonder, why won't they cooperate with me? Why don't they just do it? I'm telling them how. I'm showing them how. It's not that hard. When you're in this kind of situation, what we need to do is be able to step behind the eyes of our children, try to figure out what they are experiencing. Because clearly what they are experiencing is very different than what we are experiencing. So let's talk about a few of the considerations. The first thing, you have noticed something that is clearly wrong. Something you noticed that you see a lot of the time. It is regularly, commonly not done correctly. And it's common that parents notice it because it's like a neon sign. And it's common that parents address this because it's most noticeable. That is logical. But that's part of the problem. One reason this is part of the problem is because it must be a hard for them thing to do. If they were able to make this correction, and we know that children are driven towards relationship with their parent, they would be making progress in the direction you want them to make, or they would just simply correct it. The fact that they are not doing it is evidence that it's actually hard for them to do for some reason. We don't necessarily know the reason. Sometimes we do. Sometimes we see our kids make the correction in part, but not in whole. And an example of this would be maybe when you ask them to repeat a word, they repeat a sound in the word, but not the whole word. This would be proof that the skill is actually hard for them type of skill. Maybe they are tying the shoes in part, but they can't quite do the whole. Again, the whole is the part that is hard for them. A second reason that approaching your child with this very logical way of doing things is that your child's mind is not yet developed in that logical center. We will take a trip into brain development shortly, but let's look at the third reason this is a problem. And that is evidenced by if your child is melting down. Remember that all behavior that your child has is communication if you read it as such. What is that meltdown saying? More times than not, the situation is saying that I've tried over and over and I just can't get it right. And then there's their discouragement and their feeling of failure and the feeling not good enough when you ask them to do their very hard thing to do in your logical, adult-minded kind of way. So when our kids are having a tremendous response to what seems like a small ask, always know that there is something emotional beneath the surface that leads this. Now, none of us want to create the situation for our kids that they feel like a failure, they feel not good enough. We know that that kind of teaching early on lasts for lifetimes. We all have experienced some of that in our lives. So keep listening and we will dig out of this. But first, now we get to go deeper into what's actually going on. And we're going to take a little aside from this episode in a way because we're going to nerd out a little bit on brain development. I enjoy this, so I hope you do too. So did you know that from birth to about 2 years old, babies spend most of their time in a brainwave state called delta? This is the same healing states like adults experience during their most deep, restful sleep. And it's also the reasons newborns drift in and out of wakefulness so easily. They're like living in two worlds at once. And even when their eyes are open, you've probably seen your child in that dreamy, restful state with their eyes open. It is considered sometimes that our children are not actually awake. even when their eyes are open, because their brain moves in this delta pattern. So then, from about the ages of 2 to 7, and I do want to say that when I say these ages, depending on the source that you pick, you might read 2 to 6, you might read 2 to 8, so roughly. We also know that it is not a quick shift from one state to the next. There is a transition period. So even though I say that this is what your child's brain is operating in, we want to say that it is the majority of time. It is the natural way. Now, your children can bobble in and out of this state, but you can expect that this is the main operating pattern in their brain wave activity. So let's look at the ages of 2 to 7, because this is the most common age where parents are talking to me. During this time, children are shifting into theta, or have shifted into theta, which is highly intuitive brain state. If you have ever been in hypnosis or deep meditation, that's theta. It's often described as a bridge between conscious and subconscious mind, where it's almost like a doorway, a bridge where you can go back and forth. And the key thing for kids is that this stage, during this time, they are incredibly absorbent and they are very suggestible. This is the whole time, 2 to 7. They take everything in around them. They don't question it. And this is because the analytical mind, that hasn't fully kicked in yet. This is the stage where they're forming their core belief about themselves, about the world, and about how things work. So when we are speaking to them in this highly suggestible state, it really behooves us and our kiddos that we understand what they are communicating to us through their behavior so that we can address them in a way that their brain is going to understand better. Now, when your children get to be 7 years old, so that's 7 to 10 range, the brain moves into alpha waves. And in this state, there's creativity and lots of imagination. Now, of course, we see imagination in that 2 to 7 age, but it's not as profound as it is in the 7 to 12. This is when kids are in the zone. They are totally lost in their pretend play, in their storytelling, and in exploring the ideas that they're searching. They are also drawing conclusions about the world and how things work. That analytical mind, the one that has logic, that hasn't fully kicked in. And they are forming their core beliefs about themselves and the world through that lens that doesn't have the analytical mind. Now, around the age of 12, the brain shifts again. And this time, the brain has more beta waves. And a beta wave is the state where adults live in today. It's the logical thinking, it's analysis, it's becoming self-aware in the environment around them. It's at this point where kids become much more conscious of how they're perceived, and they become self-conscious. They start grounding themselves in the physical reality of what they see, smell, and experience with their tangible senses. And that open door connection that they have been living in between the conscious and subconscious mind, that starts to close off, and they become more and more like us as adults. When our kids are 12 and older, we are able to relate to them through logic to help them understand. And of course, there are hiccups and misfires along the way. So now, why does all this matter? Here's why. Because from the ages of 2 to 12, your child's brain is in its most impressionable state. This is when belief systems take root. Ideas about love, money, relationships, communication, self-worth, my family, what a family is, where I am in the world, all the things. So what your child believes about all the things has been formed by age 12. And then they carry those patterns into adulthood. So whether they grew up with a mindset of abundance or scarcity, or maybe it's confidence or self-doubt, whatever it is, it begins in these early years. And the best part is that as parents, we have the opportunity to shape that foundation in ways that support their growth, their their creativity, their well-being, their sense of community. As we understand how their brains develop, we can be more intentional, about the messages and experiences we provide for them. So now, with that in mind, let's go back and consider what your child is communicating with their behavior in that meltdown, and what you are trying to help them learn, and if we can shift that. Most of the parents who talk to me do have children operating in theta, and because of this, we're going to focus the rest of this episode on children in that span of 2 to 7 when they're primarily in theta. However, this conversation certainly can be had about kids in other stages too, because I have worked with kids birth through 21 for these 30 years. So if you have a question outside of this age range, just email me and we can begin a conversation. And you know my email, hello@thelanguageofplay.com. So now let's talk about those theta brain waves and what it is that we can see within their behavior. All right, at age 2 to 7, we all know that a simple no can turn into a full-blown tantrum, and the answer isn't about being bad or just having big feelings. It actually also has a lot to do with their brain development, specifically that theta brainwave state. Because children between 2 and 7 primarily are operating in theta waves, and remember, that was the same brain state that adults experience in deep meditation and in hypnosis. So theta is a state that is highly absorbent, and our kids are soaking in everything around them. They do not have a filter. Every word, every tone of voice, every experience is shaping their understanding of the world. But here's the thing, theta is not logical. When children live in theta, they are, by the very nature of the development of their brain, they are emotional, they are imaginative, they are deeply connected to the subconscious, and they're not conscious of being connected to a subconscious because all of that discussion, of course, is a logical discussion. They just are. They just live there. So when your young child has a tantrum, say they scream or cry because they can't have a cookie, it's easy to think they're just being dramatic or manipulative. But in reality, they don't have access to the beta brain waves, that's tricky to say, beta brain waves that allow for logical thinking. They don't have access to the brain waves that give them the self-awareness and the emotional regulation. Their brains simply aren't wired for reasoning through the frustration yet. They can't do it the way adults do it yet. And since theta is impressionable and reactive, when kids feel an emotion, like in today's example, when the child feels discouraged because they were not able to do a task that we tell them to do, and their feelings are failure and they're not good enough, and all of that kicks in. They feel this with their whole being. There is no buffer. They don't have the internal pause button that allows them to step back and think, oh, maybe I should explain to Mom that I'm just doing my best and Mom, don't push me so hard. No, they don't think those things. Instead, their emotions flood their system and their nervous system responds accordingly. And that is crying and yelling and even hitting. Because theta is deeply subconscious, kids in this phase aren't just learning facts, they are absorbing emotional patterns. With that in mind, let's jump back into our example. So here are some points, and if you're taking notes, here is when your notes begin on application, how to apply it to your situation. As you're taking these notes, I want you to consider which steps of what I'm about to say sound like, that doesn't make sense, or that seems not relevant to my situation, or I don't know how to implement that. These are the reasons that people contact me. So if what I'm saying doesn't quite connect in a way that you can see the stepping stones to do it, that is a good indicator that you could contact me, hello@thelanguageofplay.com, and we can schedule a time to talk about what is not quite matching what your experience is. That's what I'm good at. I'm good at taking apart the tasks, putting them into bite-sized bites for parents and kids. So the first thing, when your child is not able to handle you teaching them, and you've tried 1, 2, 3 times, and they're collapsing, they've had enough, they're done, they cannot do it. Here's where we begin. First, you focus on enhancing your connection and positive emotions with you. What this looks like is creating conditions of love and joy between you, which might be an activity that is separate from the thing you're wanting them to do, something that has nothing to do with the problem. Because when we focus on correcting our kids, improving their behavior in some way, sometimes we can forget to enjoy them where they are at today. And we need to remember to keep that enjoyment of who they are, where they are, strong. Because where they are in their development is simply where they are. I'm going to take another aside right now, because one of the common things that parents also say to me is, no, that's not my child. That might be typical for most children, but my child is advanced in this way and that way. So I want to acknowledge that yes, some of our kids are advanced, but that doesn't mean that their actual biology is advanced in their brain wave state. You can actually think about it like their body's growth. Even though they're able to swing on the parallel bars or do something extraordinary like run a long distance that you wouldn't expect, they might still be 32 inches tall. Their basic biology is still going to grow at the pace that it grows, even though they can do these other things. Your brainwave state is like that. Their basic brainwave states develop over time. They serve a purpose. They are not meant to skip it any differently than we're going to skip from 32 inches to 42 inches and just assume that your child is going to be full height. We think that's ridiculous. We know that. But it is true for the invisible thing that is going on, which is their brain wave patterns along that developmental cycle. It is the way they were created, for purpose, for reason, and it is good. And we have to learn how to work with them where they are at now. So building that connection of love and joy between you is a foundational piece for them to be able to move on to their next things. The second thing I want you to focus on is to notice what they're doing right and to let them know, to be able to celebrate with them so that they feel encouraged. Now, when we look at that word encouraged, we are building courage into. So imagine how you can have a 1-second celebration, a fist bump, a compliment, a hug, an acknowledgement of their effort. Something that only notices the positive. Not, you did that well, but you didn't. Rather, just notice the positive. The third thing, I want you to stay calm, especially when they are not calm. And this helps kiddos to regulate themselves based on how you handle it. This is called co-regulation. One example of co-regulation is when your child is upset and you hold them, your child's heartbeat will sync with yours. They change their breathing patterns to match yours, and then they become calm. This even happens with your significant other. We can help each other co-regulate ourselves just by being close to one another. Now, after you have done all this, and while you're doing all this, your child is reconnecting with you, and then you've filled their love tank. They become more full. They become more encouraged and feel more positive about who they are. When we fill up that tank, they become more able to receive a correction. The fact that they had been breaking down says that they were not able to receive that correction to the degree that you were giving it. After you have done this foundational piece, then you and your child are more ready to work together. And at this point, you're not going to pick the thing, whatever that thing is, that is the screaming, noticeable thing that is the problem. Rather, you're going to pick something easier for them to work on. Pick something that they are right a lot of the time, and they only need a little bit of help. And the reason we start with that is because we are anchoring our children into working with us so that when we address their very hard for them types of things to do, it no longer feels like an emotional attack for them. Again, not that you are, but they are reacting as if that's their experience. So we go to where they're at to speak to them in their way of understanding. A couple examples of this might be, let's say you're trying to teach your child the S sound. You pick a sound that they also need some help on, but is mostly correct, so that your child learns to work with you on speech sound changes. Maybe it's behavioral. And instead of teaching your child the thing they always get wrong, which is you're saying to them, clean their room, you're going to break it down into a part. And you're going to go beside them and say, today we're picking clothes up off the floor. Or maybe it is getting your child to listen. And instead of saying an instruction that includes 3 parts, you're going to tell them, look at me and repeat. And then you tell them one simple piece. And you say, good job, go do it. So that you break it down into smaller pieces. Now, this last step that I described, I zoomed out and described pretty in general. And this is often hard for parents because parents typically don't know which thing to pick. They haven't noticed what is 80% because, of course, you're moving at the speed of life in your home. Parents don't really know which skills are related to another skill because a lot of times your work isn't in child development. For some of you, it's going to be quite obvious. And if that is you, great. Have at it and enjoy. But for the majority, it's not obvious. Every step of the way that I described today, and those steps are 1, making that positive connection of love and joy between you. 2, notice what they're doing right and celebrate it. 3, staying calm, especially when they're not calm, and how to do it. 4, doing this long enough that your child's love tank becomes filled, and you will see goofy behaviors sometimes that reflect that their love tank is filling up. And then 5, now we're ready to begin teaching specific things that are a little bit harder, but we start where they are already successful most of the time. All of these steps I work on with parents in coaching, and this last step is particularly the thing that parents come to me for, but we really have to go back and make sure that those first steps are filled so that our children have their emotional tanks full in a way that they understand when they are in theta. If you would like to hear more about this or have questions on how this applies to your family, email me at hello@thelanguageofplay.com, and I will be excited to have a conversation with you. And if you're wanting to explore more, check the show notes because I do have a freebie for you, 5 ways to get kids to listen better, and you will get support in your inbox for some days with strategies to change how your child listens. So there is so much more to this topic, and I could talk for hours, but we're going to end this episode now. And in fact, when I created the outline for this episode, I had 7 pages, and it was just kind of fun to do a brain dump. But this is all for today, because I think that is enough for one session. And I would love to hear your thoughts. Did it make sense? Does it not pertain to your child? Do you wonder about how to make it apply to your child in a way that it works for you? Do you get excited about brain science the way I do? Again, email me at hello@thelanguageofplay.com, and I would be happy to have this conversation with you. Hey parents, I hope you found this episode helpful. If so, would you please take 30 seconds and share it with a friend who also lives or works with children? I would really appreciate it if you would leave a quick review for the show on Apple Podcasts. I read every review, and it lights me up to know that this show is making a difference. Then come join my Facebook community, where you'll meet other parents who are dedicated to helping their children grow too. You'll find the link in the show notes. Thank you for joining me. Now it's time to go. Let's pop our kiddos in the strollers and go look around outdoors and see what we have to talk about.